All right. Today we're going to jump into a really fascinating puzzle. We're talking about a 2,000-year-old mystery that's sitting right in the middle of the Gospel of Matthew. It's a story packed with contradictions, ancient beliefs, and maybe, just maybe, a single word that changes everything. So let's get into it.
So we're kicking things off with the mystery itself. And it's a big one. It's a direct, pretty jarring contradiction, in the words of Jesus, all found within the very same book.
Okay, here's the problem laid out plain as day. On the one hand, in Matthew 23, you get this really clear instruction. The Pharisees have the seat of Moses, the seat of authority, so do what they say. But then, just a few chapters earlier, in Matthew 15, you get this sharp condemnation. Why do you break God's commandment for the sake of your tradition? So, which one is it? Obey them or condemn their traditions? This is the puzzle we're going to try to solve today.
Now, to get to the bottom of this, we first have to understand who the Pharisees actually were. Their beliefs are, without a doubt, the key to unlocking this whole contradiction.
So the absolute bedrock of Phariseeism is this concept of the oral Torah. They believed that the written scriptures, the first 5 books of the Bible, that was only part of the story. They argued that God also gave Moses a second, unwritten set of laws and interpretations right there on Mount Sinai. And this oral law, they said, was passed down verbally from one generation to the next and was absolutely essential to really understand the written text.
And this belief really breaks down into 3 core ideas. First, the 2 Torahs. You need both. Second, their sages had absolute authority. So absolute that there's this one story where God supposedly defers to their ruling, saying, "My sons have defeated me." Wow. And third, this authority let them create brand new, man-made laws called takanots. These were rules you wouldn't find in the original Torah, things like very specific rituals for hand washing.
Okay, so here's where the investigation takes a really fascinating turn. What if the text that we're all so familiar with isn't the original? What if there's a different version of Matthew out there that holds the key?
The first clue is all about language. You see, the Greek text of the New Testament is just full of what scholars call Hebrewisms. Now, these are basically phrases that sound really clunky or just plain weird in Greek, but they make perfect sense if you think of them as literal word-for-word translations from Hebrew. It's kind of like trying to translate the English idiom "it's raining cats and dogs" into another language. The words might translate, but the meaning gets totally lost. This is a huge hint that what we're reading in Greek might actually be a translation of a much older Hebrew original.
And that leads us to this incredible piece of evidence, a complete Hebrew version of Matthew. It was preserved by a Spanish rabbi back in the 14th century named Shem Tov. Now, for a long, long time, people just dismissed it, thinking it was a simple translation from Greek. But more recent analysis found these intricate Hebrew word puns inside the text. And here's the kicker. These puns only work in Hebrew. That strongly suggests this text is based on an older Hebrew original, not the other way around.
And you know what? This idea isn't even new. This quote from Papias, who was an early church father writing way back around 130 AD, he just states it like it's a known fact. He says, hey, Matthew wrote in Hebrew, and everybody else just translated it as best they could. This piece of history lines up perfectly with all the linguistic evidence. So, we have the contradiction, and now we have a potential key to solving it. Let's put the Greek and Hebrew versions right next to each other and see how one single word could change absolutely everything.
Okay, so here's the verse we all know, the one that comes from the Greek manuscripts. Whatsoever they bid you observe. And in this context, they clearly, without a doubt, refers to the Pharisees. It sounds like a direct command to follow their lead.
But now, look at this. The Greek version on the left says all that they say. But Shem Tov's Hebrew version on the right says all that he says. Wait, he? So who's he? Well, if the Pharisees are sitting in the seat of Moses, then he refers to Moses. The instruction suddenly isn't to obey the Pharisees. It's to obey Moses. It becomes a command to follow the written Torah, not all the additions from the Pharisees. And just like that, the contradiction dissolves.
And the Hebrew text gets even more specific. It actually adds a direct warning that says, but according to their takanot, do not do. It explicitly calls out those man-made traditions we were just talking about, the very same ones that are condemned elsewhere in Matthew. The message becomes perfectly consistent. Follow the law of Moses, but reject the traditions of the Pharisees.
But you might be wondering, okay, is this just a one-off change, a fluke? That's a fair question. So let's see if this pattern shows up anywhere else. Let's look at another example that really strengthens the case.
A second major point of confusion in Matthew often revolves around making oaths or vows. And once again, the Hebrew text seems to offer a clarification that solves another major conflict.
So check out this comparison. The familiar Greek version on the left seems to create a brand new law. Do not swear at all. Now this seems to flat out contradict the Old Testament, which allows and sometimes even commands people to make oaths in God's name. But then you look at the Hebrew version on the right. It doesn't get rid of oaths, it prohibits false oaths. Do not swear by anything falsely. See the difference? Once again, it doesn't contradict the Torah, it actually clarifies its core principle. Be a person of your word.
So let's tie all of this together. The core argument that emerges from our source material is this. When you look at the text through the lens of Shem Tov's Hebrew Matthew, a remarkably consistent picture comes into view. The figure in the Greek text can often seem like he's changing or even abolishing parts of the Torah, but the figure in the Hebrew text consistently upholds the Torah, clarifies its principles, and tells his followers to stick to the commandments of Moses while rejecting those man-made takanot.
This whole journey through these ancient texts leaves us with one big provocative question. If a single letter, changing a they to a he, can completely flip a core teaching on its head, it really makes you wonder, how much else can be lost or maybe even changed in translation? It's a powerful reminder of how layers of language, time, and history have shaped the very words we read today.